What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, coming at you today with my top 8 Paleozoic Tearlament deck profile from this last weekend at the Fort Worth Regional. There were 508 players, I believe, so 9 rounds of Swiss. I'm going to put all my rounds on screen so you can see them, put my die wins, rolls, and losses. That didn't come out right. But yeah, there is a lot I want to talk about with this deck because it's one of those decks where I've spent the most theory over the course of like a couple years at this point, like a year and a half, ever since I got my second place finish at the Mississippi Regional I went to at the very end of Power of the Elements format. This deck is something I play off and on and just sort of depends on the format and if any new cards would come out. Like for this one, Transaction Rollback was a big deal. And yeah, it's one of my favorite decks of all time because it's just so fun. And one of the coolest things I think there is about this deck right now is kind of similar to Branded, where we're in a quote-unquote like tier 0 format with Snake Eye, where it is the most played deck by a large margin, and other engines can't keep up. But decks like this and Branded is another one that I think of. But I'm going to be talking about this deck in specific. It just like doesn't care. Like I was just letting Snake Eye play and essentially telling them like, yo, yeah, the Snake Eye engine is nice, but watch what my engine can do. And you just play engine to engine and more often than not win. Like I played 5 Snake Eyes at the regional, and as you can see by my rounds, I beat 3 of them. I got 2 draws, which one I think was unavoidable. Like we just started game 3 with like a minute left, so what are you supposed to do? And then one I could have won, but I made an egregious misplay that I'm still mad at myself at. But this was round 9 of the day. I've been playing for like 8 hours, it felt like. And you play a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh when you're playing this deck, but again, I have so much I could say about this deck because it's really one of my favorites, and I think the paleo theory when deck building is so different and interesting. But to avoid a 40-minute video, I'm not going to talk about that stuff. If you have questions in the comments, feel free to leave them. I'd love to talk about paleo to some extent. And yeah, it's definitely just one of my favorite decks I've played in recent years. And yeah, before we get into the deck profile, I do want to do shoutouts. First of all, shout out Steel Fox Games, my sponsor, for letting me go to these events easier. Shout out like all my opponents, they were all really cool. We had like a lot of good games, and then, you know, like we had a lot of cool people I like talking to there, like the Mississippi crew came, Boris was there again, shout out to him again. I shout out to him last video, so I'm doing it again. Obviously shout out my friends for driving, cool people. Shout out everyone who came up, which was like 30 people asked me for this list, so I'm glad I'm gonna be able to put this out. It was for real like 20 or 30 people. Like there were people always watching my game saying, oh wow, your deck looks so cool and so fun. Like it was a lot of people who came up and asked for the profile or what I thought of the deck. So yeah, shout out to all of them. And without further ado, let's hop into this deck profile.
Alright, so now I'm going to be going over my 40 card main deck, my 15 card extra deck, and my 15 card side deck. Sort of talk about my list and sort of how the cards performed for me at the regional. And there's a lot of deck theory with a deck like Paleo Tier because it's built very differently from more conventional decks, because you just simply see way more of your deck than a deck that plays a more like standard game plan. Because you are milling so much, you will often get down to like 8 cards in deck, meaning some of your ratios are adjusted because like you don't want to see too many of them. Like it's more important than like running a 3 of because you want to see it, because if you see too much of it, it's really bad. And there's actually a lot more to that. I'm trying to simplify it down so that there's not 40 minutes of me like talking about paleo deck theory, because I've spent a lot of time building this deck. But yeah, again, I don't want to take up too much time doing that because I could literally talk about the weird deck theory of paleo for like 40 minutes. So starting with the monsters, we have the Tearlament's Merly, the Tearlament's Havnus, and the Tearlament's Shiren. I think very obviously these are the Tearlament monsters that allow you to do your fusion summons and help you mill. They do everything for the deck, and I think it's pretty obvious we're playing them. Merly, of course, is the best one because she is level 2 Aqua. And by best, I mean she just like fits with the Paleo engine the best as well, just because, you know, level 2 Aqua, there's some synergy there. You can make totally awesome, and that's pretty nice. And Havnus, I actually did Havnus somebody once. Round 9, Havnus did the thing. I activated Havnus round 9 against my Snake Eye opponent, and she milled Tear Cache, Soliek, Meta Noise. The Tear Cache after that, once the chain resolved, I added back Tear Cache and I searched off Soliek. The Tear Cache milled Backjack and Transaction Rollback. So I pretty much won that game on turn 0, and that was the only time all day where Havnus did the Havnus thing, but it was actually disgusting. It was so broken that in all my test games, I don't think I've had Havnus mill that good. But yeah, that's my Havnus story of the day. 3 Rhino Heart. Yeah, I'm gonna maximize 3 Rhino Heart just because you always want to see him as a mill or a draw. Like, he's really good at both, which is sort of the theme of this deck, is you want all your mills to be good draws and good mills. That's very, very important. Because you have to sacrifice some card quality in this deck, and Rhino Heart is not one of those cards though. You really want to see him opening hand and as a mill. He does so much, and I think it's, again, pretty obvious we're playing 3 of this. Also being level 4 water means you can make Bahamut Shark, which we are running in the extra deck. So yeah, 3 Rhino Heart. 3 Tearlaments Kashtira. This is the most spammable of all the Tearlament monsters. Like, you are going to summon this card probably 6 or 7 times a game, which means she's going to mill like 18 to 21 cards in that case, and then of course she has her graveyard mill effect that comes up. She really gets the deck going super quickly. There's so many cards that work with Tier Cash that I'll get to as we get through the profile. Next, I played a very small danger package consisting of 1 Nessie and 1 Mothman. I had played 2 Nessie in the past, however I decided to cut it down to 1 to play a different card that I will explain once I get there. And I still don't know if that's correct. Again, I could talk about like deck theory and ratios with this deck for a while, so I'm trying not to go that in depth, but I don't know if what I made was the right choice. I don't think there's a right answer for the card I played over this for a second Nessie, but essentially what these do is they're really good in your bad hands and can discard like really bad cards or cards you want in graveyard, like Solyak, Trivi Karma, things like that, and you get draws and extenders out of it, which is huge. But also they're good mills, so again, these fit into the category of good draws and good mills, because they're really relevant for certain fusions. Like Mothman can make Mud Dragon, and Nessie can make Garura with a Tearlament. Of course, Nessie can also be used to make Kaleido Heart, so having these is really nice. Just seeing them, like if you see too many of these as mills, they actually have like diminishing returns, because you won't be able to fuse with like all of them in a game, because there'll just be too many dangers in your graveyard. And then drawing too many of them also has diminishing returns, because obviously like if you have 2 Nessie in hand, it gets kind of weird. At least that's my experience with these cards. So I do like just playing 2 of them, but I do think 3 with a second Nessie is also pretty viable. Now, one of just the absolute goats of the entire weekend was to Backjack. This card carried some games on his back. In fact, I could probably attribute like 80% of my wins to Backjack. He was absolutely phenomenal. Overperformed compared to like how he does in testing. Like, he's always good, and that's why I upped him from 1 to 2 in so many of my lists. Like, I've had lists at 1 because when you mill 2, it gets weird. If you draw 2, it gets weird, and that's sort of the sacrifice of playing 2 Backjack. But when you do mill him, it is so powerful, because he was setting like Needlebug Nest, Morella, Daruma Karma Cannon just all day. He just sets interrupts on your opponent's turn. In Paleo Tier, when you're milling so much, it just feels so good. Obviously, if you draw him, you can like Shiren him away. We do run Linkuriboh for the Backjack, and he was so good. But yeah, I don't want to play 3 just because there is like a real issue of drawing multiple of him, which did happen to me like twice all day. And then when you mill him in multiples, it's also like not that great. I play 2 just to optimize the chance I see him early off of some mills, because he does put you so far ahead, because he gets you a trap that does something, but that also nets you a paleo. So it just gets you more traps for your paleos, and then also you get the power of whatever trap he set. That's it for monsters. On to spells. I am playing the 1 planet, which this is always something I feel the need to explain, and I have explained it in a few of my other Paleo Tier deck profiles, but essentially every card you've seen in the profile so far is both a good draw and a good mill. Planet does not fit into that category. It is simply a good draw. It is not a good mill. Every time I mill it, I'm quite upset. That being said, the 1 planet is definitely worth the bad mill, because we are playing Trivi Karma. We do play Barricade Board Blocker that can add this back if it's milled. And Planet is just an insanely powerful card. So like the card quality of drawing it is so good that it's worth sort of breaking the philosophy of you need good draws and good mills. And there are a couple cards like that in this list, but Planet is a little different because it's a spell. It's not like the other cards in the list that I'm going to talk about. But yeah, you definitely should play bare minimum 1 of this. I think you can play more if there's some cards in the list you really don't like and you just want to draw Planet more. I think that's fine. But like late game, especially when you start getting into your grind and you need your mills to be good, Planet kind of takes away from that. So I'm on just the 1 Planet, and it was huge for me all day. Just absolutely insane card. 3 Scream. This should be pretty obvious, I think. The thing about Scream that's so good is, again, good draw and good mill, but like it is almost as good as Planet sometimes. Like the mill 3 is so insane because it's every turn and it really just turbos through your mills. And like the more you're milling, eventually your deck just becomes insane because it's nothing but like good mills and tier monsters like the longer the game goes, and Scream really helps you get there quite quickly. The 500 attack loss is also relevant in a deck where you're trying to stay alive for a couple turns usually. Yeah, it's really helpful, but also it's like, again, good draw, good mill. Adding a trap from your deck to your hand is insane because when you're adding a trap in this deck, you're not just adding a trap, right? Like, the trap you add is gonna be Soliek or Meta Noise, because those are the traps we play, but it's also bringing back a Paleo. So you are getting just like a critical mass of traps in your hand by milling cards like Scream and other cards in the deck, where your Paleos are then just like facilitated really well. And I do side out one Scream going second sometimes, which is only in rare scenarios where I'm siding like 10 cards. I wouldn't normally side one of these out going second because opening Scream Rhino going second has been just one of my surefire ways to break through like really good boards. Like, it can get you really far. Of course, it does have some like RNG, but that's tier limit for you. Lastly, for spells, one Grief. This card, again, fits the category of good draw, good mill very well. Although for me at the event in 9 rounds, I only drew this card one time, which is crazy because I usually draw, I drew Planet like 3 or 4 times bare minimum. So Grief just was like, I drew it less than normal, but it was really good to be milled and add back banished traps. That does come up a lot. And the one time I drew was actually against my Eldritch opponent, and he had Rivalry of Warlords face up, so I couldn't even use it. So Grief as a draw did not come up for me at this event, but I would never take this card out. I think this card's insane. It's just like an extender going first. Like, you open this in Soliek, that's really good because you just send Rhino Heart. It has a lot of implication as a really solid extender, and yeah, I definitely like the one of. It also gives Kaleido Heart one more option to send if it's destroyed, so that does come up too. On to the traps, which is the bulk of the deck. I think I'm on 22 traps, I'm pretty sure. Starting off with D3 Soliek, yeah, this is something you definitely want to maximize at 3 because you're doing so much milling and it's just Rota for Tearlaments. You will run through 3 of this very quickly, and this is one of the biggest points of synergy between the packages of Paleo and Tier, is the fact that Morella can send Soliek, and that comes up all the time. I think it's my #1 send off Morella for sure, because then you can get Tier Cash or Hobness, usually Tier Cash, start milling some more. If you had Scream, that's like a mill 6 off Morella. And that's pretty good, and that does come up as like a starter, so it makes Morella even more valuable. Also, Soliek's just an insane card because even if you draw multiple, you can just like flip these and bring back Paleos. That comes up. And its effect is insane. Like, Soliek is a bonkers card. It actually does so much. Like, every tier card does so much, but Soliek is one of those that, honestly, I don't understand how this card doesn't have a super rare. That bothers me constantly. But yeah, 3 Soliek for sure. And then lastly is 1 Meta Noise. This card is also insane. The add back from Grave is super, super good. I have played 2 of this in certain lists, but I think when you start running 5 tier traps, you do see some of those more awkward hands where you have like Soliek, Meta Noise, Scream, and then no tier monster. That's always fun. And 1 Meta Noise was completely fine. You can recycle it with Grief. And not only that, you can actually transaction rollback this card, which I think is super funny. Because this is a card that you shouldn't be able to activate twice in 1 turn, but then you can. And that means like 2 Tearlament sends and 2 Book of Moons, which is really good. I didn't transaction rollback this all day. It just didn't come up because there were better cards to rollback. But Meta Noise is one of my favorite tier traps for sure. I think it's just really phenomenal. Now on to the namesake of the deck, the Paleozoics. I am on 3 Morella and 3 Dinomischus. Yeah, so these are the Paleos of the deck. I'm not playing Canadia like I've done in the past. Canadia just doesn't make the cut in my opinion anymore. There's so many cards you want to play in this deck. And while Canadia was like good when I played it in like Power of the Elements format the first time, it was still just like okay. And I think these 6 Paleos are the ones that just always do something. I wish I could run Leoncolia because I love Leoncolia with certain cards in this deck like Rise to Full Height, Transaction Rollback. If your Tearlaments get banished, you can put them back. I think like in a game state where those come up, Leoncolia is insane. However, the problem is you like open Leoncolia, it doesn't do anything. If you only play like 1 like I plan to, most of the time it's just going to be, you know, Paleo Mill number 7. And I know 6 Paleos doesn't seem like a lot to like call it Paleo tier, I guess, but these come up way more than you'd think. Like, I often have at least 2 or 3 in the graveyard, which is more than enough. That's all you need. If you build too many Paleos, there are huge diminishing returns on it, which is why I actually cut the Canadias from a different one of my lists. If you see like 3 Paleos off a mill, that doesn't feel great because you need other cards to make them good, unlike a Soliek mill, a Scream mill, a Backjack mill that are all just really good on their own. You need other cards to make the Paleo mills good, so I felt like 6 is strong because you have like the chance to draw them and to mill them, which is like both are fine. Both get a Paleo in graveyard. So as a draw and a mill, they are both great. And yeah, honestly, these 6 were super strong. I love these cards. I mean, they're one of the highlights of the deck. It just makes you essentially like unkillable with Rise to Full Height, and it gives you so much follow-up on your next turn. And that's really like the main goal of this deck, is to set up your Paleos Rise to Full Height so that they can stay on the board because they're unaffected by monster effects, and your next follow-up turn is absolutely insane. Also, Dynamiscus does randomly give you just like an insane matchup versus decks like the Eldritch deck I played or like Runic Stun. On to the other cards that are very similar to Planet, in the fact that their card quality in hand is so good, you just forego the theory of like you need good draws and good mills. The first one of those is Needlebug Nest. Yeah, Needlebug Nest is bonkers for obvious reasons. I think every paleo list plays this. Even some tier lists play this. This card is insane for both engines, and it is not a great mill. However, you do want to run 3, like regardless, because its card quality is so strong. And you can transaction rollback it, so it's not even like the worst mill in the world. You want Backjack to hit this, so yeah, obvious 3 of. And the same can kind of be said about this next card. It's not a great mill. However, the card quality is really, really good, and you want Backjack to hit it. And arguably, it's the only piece of maybe non-engine in the deck, but it really doesn't feel that way because it kind of feels like engine almost. It's 3 Daruma Karma Cannon. And this card, like Backjack, one of the GOATs of the entire weekend. There's 3 cards that I would attribute like most of the success to, besides obviously like tier engine. It's Backjack, and the second one is Daruma Karma Cannon. This card was insane all day. This card does not feel fair. Versus Snake Eye, which I believe I played 5 of. I think I've played 5 pure Snake Eye, where this card's not even as good versus the pure Snake Eye deck. It's better versus the Fire King version. However, even versus pure Snake Eye, this card would just won me like so many games. It doesn't feel fair. Like I sent 4 links off someone's board one game, which was crazy. It stops their turn when they're pushing, and they end up having like Flamberge and 3 level 1s and face down defense. Like if they still have Link Kribo, like I didn't SP the Link Kribo, or I didn't Dynamiscus the Link Kribo, they can like tribute one of those off, and that's like, you know, it helps their board a little bit, and then Jet can extend. But besides like those cards, which you kind of prep for when you activate Karma Cannon, this card was winning me so many games. And there was a couple games where Backjack would hit it and my opponent would just like roll their eyes, because like, how do you play through Karma Cannon? It's so hard. This card, while not a good mill, can also be transaction rollbacked, and it makes your Backjack mill better. So I do think it's worth playing 3 of. I wouldn't change it. I think this card was beyond bonkers, and yeah, definitely one of the GOATs of the weekend. Next up is a huge change for this deck from any of the versions I played. I decided to only play 2 Rise to Full Height, which is a strange decision because you really want to see this card. However, almost every game I've lost with this deck, at the regional I took it to before in Power of the Elements, and the case tournament in SIAC I went to, or it was some SIAC tournament. Drawing 2 of this card was just like the nail in the coffin. Like drawing 2 of this was so bad, and I'm happy to report I didn't draw 2 of this card once yesterday. Probably because I put it at 2 rather than 3, and you're doing so much milling, especially with the addition of transaction rollback, where like you can hit Needlebug Nest. I was doing so much milling that I was consistently seeing 1 to 2 of this card. There was one game where I had to get down to like 10 cards in deck, and it was like a huge scare for me to get this card in graveyard when I really needed it. I had to transaction rollback a Needlebug Nest, and then I hit both in that mill. Again, there was only like 10 cards in deck after that, so fair enough. That was the only time where I was like actually looking for this card and I didn't know if I would get to it. But in the worst case scenario, you can always just like Morella this card and feels pretty safe. And you, again, like Paleos, have the ratio where you can like draw it and it works. You can mill it and it works, but you don't ever want to draw 2 of this. It's so bad. This card, if you don't know, is sort of the only reason I think Paleos as a deck can function. Yeah, it essentially makes, it's like Threatening Roar from graveyard if you're using it effectively, where you Rise to Full Height something and you remove that card from the board, and then your opponent essentially doesn't get to attack anything in their battle phase unless they have an unaffected monster. And that's really good. It's essentially just Threatening Roar from grave. There's also a nifty play that has never come up for me, but people always talk about it, so it's just like the phantom play that doesn't exist. But if you have like a Garura in defense position, and your opponent attacks it, and you flip Rise to Full Height on it, it's like 48 defense and deals double damage. That sounds hilarious. I don't think that will ever come up, but it could. And yeah, Rise to Full Height, one of the main reasons Paleo exists. And I didn't have a problem with 2. In fact, I think it helped. But there was that one sketchy moment where I was like, dang, maybe I should have played 3 because I don't know if I'm going to see Rise to Full Height. Next, I have a bunch of one-of traps, starting with Lost Wind. I think this card is insane in Paleo tier. It is so good, especially once you get into that grind game. This is the card I took out the second Nessie for, and I think the one flex spot in the deck. I think you could do a lot of things with the one Lost Wind, kind of whatever you want. I chose this card because it does so much. First of all, it's a perma negate and half attack, which is really strong. But the other thing is it resets itself, which means you activate this card and you negate their monster permanently and you bring back a Paleo. And then it resets itself for your follow-up turn where you, again, perma negate a card and bring back a Paleo. So it's like 2 Paleos in one, which is really strong. Again, you get like this critical mass of traps. It's just a really strong mill that does something and makes your follow-up better. Like you could also play Breakthrough Skill over this slot, but I think this card's better than that. You could play the second Nessie if you wanted to. But yeah, Lost Wind was really good for me. Again, I don't think there's a correct answer between whether I wanted to play that or Nessie. I think they both would have come up. But yeah, Lost Wind was actually good for me. And then the third GOAT of the deck that I was talking about as I've been going through this profile is the Lost Wind, or did I say Lost Wind? Vivid Tail. This card was amazing for me all day. Yeah, it was actually so strong. It did so much. You know, when you draw this, it's 3 traps for Paleos, or it's 2 traps for Paleos, but 3 bounces. So this card with Tearlament's Cash Tira comes up all the time to just give one, like you summon the same Tier Cash like 4 times if you draw this card and Tier Cash, which is a lot of milling. And Vivid Tail definitely overperformed. Like it's been good in testing and I've kept it ever since I've been playing this deck. But like it overperformed at the regional, did way more than it ever has in testing, and yeah, Vivid Tail, very strong card. And then we have the last 2 cards of the deck, which are actually like the opposite of Planet and Needlebug Nest, where they're good draws and not good mills. These are bad draws but good mills, and there's only 2 because their card quality is so awful. You don't want to draw these in multiples, but it's Trivy Karma and the Transaction Rollback. These can both be Morella'd, which helps. The issue is when you draw them, these are the main reason we actually run Barricade Board Blocker, although it's also really helpful for adding back Scream and Planet from your graveyard and just being a like Link 2 you can climb into to make Sprint. But yeah, these cards are just absolutely amazing when they're in your graveyard. Like they do so much. Transaction Rollback hitting Daruma Karma Cannon came up more times than I can count. Needlebug Nest was a huge target. Morella I think was once. Dino-Miscus was once or twice. And then Trivy Karma adding Planet or Scream or Soloyek or Meta Noise or Grief. Those are all your targets. They're all really strong. And if you mill this, especially on your first turn, it can just go so much farther than it should have. But yeah, they're awful draws. So that is some of the sacrificing of card quality in our hand just for really good mills. And I think Tearlament will just always have some of that to some extent. But yeah, that is it for the main deck. That took a long time. I should probably recommend people to watch this in 1.5 times speed. But yeah, that is the 40 card main deck. On to the extra deck. 1 Linkuriboh for the normal summon backjack technique. Yeah, I think you do need this card just in case you only draw backjack. It does come up. 1 IP Masquerena. This card is one of your main end board pieces. In fact, it's mostly my end board unless my hand is like mostly tier, and then it's usually this and like totally awesome. This card is bonkers because it can go into SP Little Knight, which is one of the best cards for this deck, and like every deck, you know, not much to explain with SP. 1 Sprint you can also make with the IP Masquerena. This card is very good for obviously dumping Tearlament's Merly, which, you know, comes up quite often because it's Tearlaments. And then you sometimes have Bahamut Shark left on your board, or like a hard made Totally Awesome where his effect becomes relevant. 1 Barricade Borg for, I mean, I pretty much talked about this card already throughout the deck profile, but yeah, he's really strong for discarding like Trivy Karma, Transaction Rollback, and just being a Link 2 that's pretty generic. And then 1 Dark, which this has been my flex spot in the extra deck. And Dark didn't come up for me all day, so I still think this card can be sort of adjusted to be something better. I don't know what that would be. Like this 1 card, I haven't found any card that like comes up more often than another. In theory, Dark is like one of the best slots here because like even when he's not good in like a bad hand, you can like crash into something and search a Tearlament. He can also steal like really strong cards from your opponent's graveyard, like especially in the branded matchup. He should be good. He's also like just 2 monsters turn into Sprite Sprint if they do have a monster engraved. So I think Dark is fine, but I think you can also toy around with this slot. And that's it for all the links. Then the fusions, we're on to Kaleido Heart. This is the only card I play 2 of in my extra deck, and I definitely had Unicorn used on me once because I played against essentially Kashtira Snake Eye. And he looked at my extra deck, he went, dang, 2 Kaleido Hearts, and I'm like, yeah, This card doesn't come, like, I'm not playing it because Unicorn exists, like, that's not the reason it's a 2 of. It's just I actually make 2 of this, like, quite often. Because this is a grind deck, you will get into the grind game very often. If you lose 1, winning becomes harder. So I simply decided to play 2 because I'm always in the grind game and 2 comes up quite often. So 2 Kaleido Heart, and then the very standard Tearlament fusions of Mud Dragon, who's insane. Being level 4 water is also insane. The Garura and the Dragostapelia. These all come up and they sort of perform like, specifically Mud Dragon and Dragostapelia perform like an infinite loop with each other as long as you don't put both on the board at the same time, which I try not to, unless I know putting up both wins me the game. Because otherwise you might end up in a weird spot where you can't fuse with your tiers, which can make your grind game worse. But yeah, all of these were phenomenal all day. Dragostapelia gets summoned the least. I think I summoned it 2 or 3 times, but every time I did, it was good, even if it was just as like a 27 body. Now on to the Xyz monsters, which there aren't that many, but they're very important because obviously one of them is Opabinia, which is good for paleo stuff. This comes up quite often. And Totally Awesome, who I summoned like twice in one turn, like several times throughout the day. Toad is definitely the better of the Xyz in this list. Back when I was running 9 Paleos, I think Opabinia was the better one. But Toad definitely was outperforming Opabinia this event. What's really nice about these is they're aqua monsters, so you can put them back for Kaleido Heart if they're in graveyard and you need another one. So yeah, both of these were great, and they're your link 2s that you go into. And I said link 2s, but I meant rank 2s. And then Bahamut Shark. This is the only Xyz I'm running, so it means like I can't Xyz with my Shiren, which is unfortunate, but I don't think Redoer has like ever come up for me really. At least not too often. There's been maybe a couple times where Redoer would have been cool, so maybe you can replace Dark with that. But Bahamut Shark comes up a lot just when you see multiple Rhino Heart, or you make Mud Dragon turn 1 and you can make this, and it just gets another Toad and then provides like link fodder. So Bahamut Shark was great all day. And the last card I chose to play was actually Typhon, who I summoned 2 or 3 times, and he was like solid enough. He didn't ever really do too much, but he did bait some interrupts, which made my traps on the next turn like a little better. On to the side deck, which first we did have our field center. So, you know, Kit Kalos was there. We're still playing, you know, Kit Kalos in spirit with the field center, so very nice. But yeah, onto the side deck. This side deck, I think there was some really cool theory with it. I had a lot of fun with, especially the first 7 cards I'm going to show, and I think they were really great for the deck. Because again, one of the things about this deck that I love is it just goes like, it's really stubborn isn't exactly the word I want to use, but the way I'm running it is essentially like, I don't care like what your engine does. I'm going to beat you engine versus engine, which I think is like really cool about the deck. It's just like Tearlaments at its strongest, where it's like, hey, your deck, yeah, Snake Eye's a strong engine, but I'm here to go like mono-y-mono, engine versus engine, just try to win like that. And the side deck, these next 7 cards are kind of the same. Again, this deck has like almost no non-engine except arguably Daruma Cannon. But the first cards are 3 Impulse and Fire Attacker. This engine was quite good. It came up 2 or 3 times and it was great every time. There is a downside of siding this. If you don't know what this package does, essentially your opponent activates something like Snake Eye's Ash. You chain Impulse, Special Fire Attacker, and because they added a card from their main deck to their hand, you can draw 2 cards and discard 1, which is insane. I had games with this discarded Backjack, which was the most relevant, because discarding Backjack goes so crazy, because then you can set Karma Cannon on their turn if you get fortunate enough, or Needlebug Nest, or Morella, all are good. Discarding Solyek with this card is amazing, and it just gets your engine going faster at like a +1 or 2, and that's really strong. The downsides of siding this in is it makes your deck worse as like the game goes on. This is one of those cards that are just a good draw, not a good mill, but I felt that was worth it. So you start milling these, and unless it essentially won you the game or your other mills are good, it can put you quite far behind because you're not getting anywhere when you mill these. In fact, it makes it worse because you're putting fires in your graveyard. But it didn't really come up. Like every time I sided this, I was happy. And when I drew Impulse 2 or 3 times, it was very strong and definitely put me at least a turn or 2 ahead. It felt like it's very, very strong. And then besides those 4, the next 3 cards that were also super fun are the Phantasmes. So running all 7 of these, the Impulses and the Phantasmes, does a lot because you can draw them together. Phantasme can also put back the Fire Attacker if you draw it, which helps these 2 engines kind of work together. You can draw into Impulse, or Fire Attacker can draw into Phantasme, puts 2 bodies on your board, and they both drew you cards. And in case of Fire Attacker discarded one, it sculpted your hand. It was very strong, and Phantasma is actually not a bad mill because you can make Mud Dragon with him, which is quite relevant, so when you side Phantasma, it doesn't feel that bad. And I did play a lot of Snake Eye, where these cards come up the most, so yeah, I was pretty happy with this side deck, and they definitely perform for me. And there's like another card where these 7 are relevant that I'll get to in a tad bit. The next 2 cards I think are pretty obvious. It is the Shufflers. Ishizu is still here represented in the tier deck. And yeah, these cards didn't get sided that much. I actually didn't side these very often for the Snake Eye decks because they can just be like really bad draws. But this is really good for the stun decks, kind of like all the runic stun decks. These come in instantly. Versus my Eldritch opponent, these came in instantly. But yeah, versus the stun decks, this was great. And versus my Eldritch opponent, which was actually quite a hard match, these came up huge. And definitely I contribute that win to the Ishizu cards. Alright, next up is surely a part of the side deck. Definitely one of the side deck cards of all time. And again, this is another card where the Phantasmes and the Impulse Fire Attacker engine comes up. And that is, we are playing 3 Dogwood. Yep, this is a card. I only drew it once or twice, but it was very good when I drew it. Needlessly put, you're playing Paleozoic, you need this card. Sometimes you just need to gain life points. And this card does have a max C effect. Like, this card is actually pretty strong, especially in a deck like Paleozoic where you're running Rise to Full Height. But yeah, that is enough about Dogwood. And then we also played 1 Scattershot. We are running Sprite Sprint, so this can come up to deal 500 damage. Maybe finish your opponent if they're at, they took 7,500 and you can send Scattershot and burn them. And then also it's level 2. So you can have a Paleozoic and you can normal summon Scattershot and make Opabinia. Scattershot is very cool. That's all on these cards. They're there. Alright, and now for the go first side of the side deck. Something I actually want to talk about, unlike the last 4 cards that are gross. We have 1 Tearlament's Crime. This is like a decent go first card, and I definitely sided it in a couple times if I did happen to go first. Especially versus the Eldritch matchup. That's the one time I drew it and it actually negated something was versus that match. So yeah, Tearlament's Crime is there. It was actually better to be milled and add back banished Tearlaments when your opponent side in Bestials or you're playing against Runic or something. Crime comes up for that, although I didn't play against Runic. And then Ultimate Despair Mayakashi Trap. I'm happy to report I didn't use this card all day. That's pretty cool. But the theory is when you're going first, the best way you can go first in this deck and beat crazy board breakers is to put something in your graveyard like the Mayakashi Trap and Transaction Rollback. Again, that didn't come up for me today, but in testing it has. In fact, one test game I had Tearlament's Kashtira mill both this and Transaction Rollback, and my opponent quit. And that was pretty nifty, but yeah. It's there for rollback, and then your opponent can't summon anything that turn. Obviously, it's a turn skip. It's really gross, and because you're running Morella and Mill so much, I thought it was worth running, even though you don't have Beatrice. But yeah, I chose to side deck it because I don't think it's worth in the main. And yeah, that is it for my deck profile. That probably took 6 years. I'm sorry. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you have any questions on the deck, feel free to leave comments. I'll definitely be responding to them. I know my upload schedule isn't consistent at all. I'm barely a YouTuber at this point. But I do like to keep you guys updated from time to time, especially when I do well at an event. So I hope you guys enjoyed the deck. I had at least 20 people ask me for the profile. So yeah, glad to put this one out there. Hope you guys enjoyed. This was Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.